Several years had passed since the erection of the first beacon, and during this time he had been informed that the Sharnites had erected others, one in each of their temples' inner sanctums, away from outside eyes. Indirectly, again, they had aided him in his path, as well as their own downfall. He sent some of those he had taken to those beacons in order to infuse them, albeit with barely a hint of his power, so that he could sense and locate them, as well as convert them to tethers at his leisure, when he was ready to begin siphoning his energies from this plane to him here. Yes, it would be their industrious nature that was to aid in their own prime's demise. He almost felt sorry for them in their push to achieve what they believed would aid others. Almost. The only thing they were aiding was the eventual consuming of their homelands. The only consolation, although they knew nothing of it, was that they would end up united with their true god, him. A meeting had been arranged with the draconic ones. Well, a single one, with one of his tainted priests of Sharn. The location he had set was a ruined fortification nearby to his tether, and he had infused the area with as much of his own magic as he could do without it disrupting and breaking it down. He had one shot at this, and he was not going to fail due to having a lack of power at his disposal. Additionally, each of the planar travellers had been infused to their capacity, so he could draw upon them if needed. He reasoned that it was a precaution he had to take, as he had no real idea on the power level of these creatures, beyond watching them fly past his senses, only from reports of their deeds. The only real experience he had with such was from his early times, when he had formed bonds with their kind before Terraspine had slaughtered them all. Other than those, he had oddly never encountered their kind in any way whereby which he could gauge their prowess in any true confrontation. This could be interesting, he mused, as they all stood around awaiting the meeting. He rode inside the priest, hidden from senses by his manipulation of the threads held within, and he waited in the center of the ruin. They would have to come to him, and thereby be within his small area of infused ground, where he would enact his plan. The sound of rushing wind announced the landing grey dragon, as it descended almost silently from the skies, and all were buffeted a little by the beats of pulsating air as the wings guided their descent. He had forgotten how majestic their kind were, their power and form assuredly a sight to behold up close, especially for mortal kinds, and so he had his priest act as such. For a brief moment his mind flooded with those he had lost before snapping back to the task at hand. He waved and motioned them to come over to him, and they did, their huge form eclipsing most of the ruins as they sat down a few dozen feet from the priest.
"So, what is this strange magic you wish to show me, friend? You said it was something you have never seen. Is this true?"
They said, their voice whispering from all directions, but it arrived as a gale-force volume, partially deafening those present. "Indeed," the priest began, motioning to a beacon softly glowing. "It is coming from this object, and I am unsure just what it is. Perhaps you could take a closer look and discern it?" The dragon nodded and reached out to encircle the beacon with their clawed hand, and closed their eyes as they began to sense the threads and discern their nature.
"It is indeed a foreign magic to this prime, and one I have never encountered personally. But it seems," they slowed as the threads resisted their attempts to unravel them, "they may be somehow divine, as well as planar." They continued their struggle to pry them apart, to get to the core truth. "Yes, I thought they seemed divine, but was unsure of their identity, or source as well," the priest added. He needed to wait before he revealed his presence. He had to glean this dragon's level of power before he engaged it. He could afford no mistake with this. They took a seat upon one of the low walls, and watched as the dragon slowly manipulated and tried to force the threads apart. They were indeed adept at this.
but he was ensuring they held fast until he had what he needed from them.
"It is as though," they began,
their voice showing their exertion,
"this divinity does not want to give up its identity."
And they stepped closer to it, adding another clawed hand to the effort and channeling more power. Their body began to radiate a soft red hue as they focused their power, and they began drawing simultaneously from the magic in the area and siphoning it directly from the line of force flowing in the vicinity. They were more powerful than he had reckoned with, as what they were doing was pulling raw, unshaped magic from the nearby line of force to aid their efforts. They were also attempting to use the magic in the ground nearby, but, thanks to his prior planning, that was his magic, and it would do only his bidding. Once they had begun pulling power to them, they seemed to falter for a moment and glance around. Looking to the ground and then to the plane of travellers, their gaze finally settling upon him.
"The magic here is wrong. Something is wrong,"
they said slowly, their volume dropping toward the end as he realized this was a trap.
"The time is now,"
he shouted in his mind, and with that the priest stood up and their eyes darkened as he took control.
"Indeed, the magic here is not of your knowledge, for it is mine."
And with that he released the threads from their stored places, the travellers, the ground, and even the beacon.
"Now look upon my truth."
The dragon could sense nothing but his threads, and was immediately filled with panic and dread.
"No! You are not possible!"
And they began to slowly back away from the priest as he slowly advanced.
You are a myth! A lie!"
The voice betraying their fear of what they were seeing. "I am a myth, you say," he said slowly, smiling at them from the puppet priest. "You are not that lucky. Myths are not always real, but like your gods, I am as real as you are." They looked about in panic, searching for an escape, but all they could see were his threads, and so they stretched their wings and flexed, ready to take to the skies to escape this cage if fear took hold.
"I think not,"
he shouted, and raised one of his hands and motioned to their wings. His threads obeyed and entwined them around and through, anchoring them to the ground. "You are going nowhere I do not wish you to go."
"Ah!"
They let out a bestial scream that shattered the eardrums of all present, and would have been heard for tens of miles had his threads not already formed a shell preventing such things. There could be no witnesses after all. He did not need his vessel to hear in order to hear, and he merely grinned menacingly as they thrashed against the threads that bound them earthward. "The thuliseak has proven useful finally," he nodded inwardly, as this was one of his tricks he had used on others, only now he knew of it. He was by no means adept in the execution of such, but his power more than made up for that blasted creature's prowess in this instance, and the end result was adequate. His prey could neither call for help nor evade his grasp. This was going well. He moved closer as the threads held their form from taking flight, pinning their wings against their body, and as he did they exerted an immense force of will and struck him hard, sending the priest slamming into a wall, the left of their torso being rent asunder. The priest gurgled as they began to spit blood from their shattered, bleeding form, already choking as their lungs rapidly filled and life ebbed from them. He sighed, and left the now shattered body, and formed something more to his liking from the magic around. His twisted husk shone in the dulling light of day, and he drew the priest into him as he had done so countless times before, stripping them of their life and tearing apart their soul. And then, once done, he turned to the dragon, who was breathing heavily as he fought against his hardening threads to stand against this foe. He noted their muscles straining and fighting against them. "You truly are a fighter. I commend your fortitude," he said as they strained to stand.
"I won't be taken like they were! Let me go, Scourge!"
they roared. Oh, you know me by that identity? He asked, taken aback that they could know such from a time surely beyond their own. How could they?
We know more than you realize, and I will not let myself be taken by you, destroyer!
They twisted in his threads with seemingly newfound strength. Well, wait, how could they know these things? This was impossible. Unless they too were of his demonic brethren. But that was impossible. These were creatures of the primes, born of... Wait, was that it? Were they truly born of this place?
Release me, you abomination!
They roared again. He stepped forward and slowly clenched his outstretched hand. The threads holding their wings drew tighter and crushed their body, holding it fast. He had to know. I will release you. You have my promise. But first, I need truth. He stood feet away from their now lowered head and looked to them calmly. Where do you hail from? They tried to fight the threads but could not, as he now controlled them directly, and he was not going to allow this opportunity to pass. They resigned themselves to their captive state, relaxing their form, and began strengthening their mind for the probing that they were sure was about to ensue. They had heard the old tales, and would fight back as hard as they could. He would not let him take them easily. He nodded as he saw what they were doing, and simply stated, Tell me where you originate, your origin, and you can leave, untouched further. They stared at him. It had to be some kind of trap. They would not give him what he wanted. They had to protect their own identity as well as the knowledge they held, and they smiled to him softly as they changed their tact. He would get as little as they could allow. He watched on as they dropped their mental guards and appeared to accept their fate, but he also noticed they were pulling in magic again from the line of force that lay nearby. It was of no concern to him, for they would need years to amass enough to even have a chance of briefly breaking this hold. So he watched on and touched their scaled head, the first one of their kind he had touched in millennia. For a moment he recalled the scaled ones and their kindness, their teaching and their kinship, and in this one he saw something almost familiar. This one was one of their descendants, one of their ancient kin. They were from those he had known, and this might explain how they were able to manipulate the weave so well, and to identify him. Perhaps some form of ancestral knowledge? This moment, however, was a lot longer than he realized, as somehow this link he had felt by touching them had somehow allowed them time to enact their own plan. And as his mind cleared from the cloud's imagery of the scaled one, his error became apparent. The dragon lay limp, still smiling at him, but something was wrong. The eyes no longer showed the signs of sentience, that spark of insight that had been there before. They were still alive, but something was wrong. What had they done? He asked himself, the realization slowly dawning. You were magnificent. Why? He asked them. But they merely smiled back at him, their lips in a sick drawl, and now he saw the tears that streamed from their eyes as puddles on the ground. They could not answer. They could no longer understand. He flared with anger as he realized what had happened, that even he could be manipulated by such. They had known of his past, of his ancestry, or at least enough to be able to use it to give them a chance to prevent him from gaining knowledge. The truth was, even if they had told him what he had asked for, he would not have allowed them to go. But even that promise had not been enough to prevent them from considering this. As he peered closer at the living powerhouse, he noticed the raw magic rapidly seeping from their ears, nose, and eyes, and eventually it permeated their entire head. They had done the unthinkable. They had killed themselves by building up raw magic within their brain, turning it into raw energy. Not threads, just pure, raw magic. If threads, he could read them, reweave them. But when converted into raw, pure energy, threads lost all they held, even to his knowledge and ability. They had committed suicide to prevent him gaining any true knowledge beyond what they had let slip, and used his own nature to make it a possibility. Clever indeed, but infuriatingly so. His rage was still at the surface, but he had only one option open now to him, and so he set about it. The slow absorption of their body into his, so he could duplicate them. The only issue was that any recreation of them would have no driving sentience of its own, as such had already gone from them, and so he would have to control it directly. This was a victory, but at great loss to both his plans, but also to his mental state. He needed to separate his feelings from actions somehow, for as he had just been shown, with them, he was fallible, and this had to change. He would take this place and find the answers he needed, but it would take far longer now, as one of their kind was now deceased, or to their knowledge, missing, and perhaps they would discover his actions sooner than he had reckoned with. It was time to prepare.